The running shoes sit by the door, laces tucked in, exactly where they have been every morning for 3 months. But this morning, the door stays closed and no one goes outside. A single skipped run might not matter, but by the end of the week, the shoes haven't moved. The routine that felt automatic just 7 days ago has vanished without a clear reason. Why can a routine feel unshakable one day and completely gone the next? The person who skipped the run might say they lost motivation, and that sounds straightforward. But motivation was there last week, and the week before that, nothing obvious changed inside them. So the answer cannot be that motivation simply evaporated overnight. Something deeper maintains a routine, and when that something shifts, the routine falls apart even when the desire remains. To understand why, we need to look at what a routine really is and what holds it in place. The common belief is that strong willpower and clear goals are the secret to lasting routines. Yet many people with strong goals watch their best routines collapse after a single disruption. A routine is not just a decision you make fresh each morning. It is a sequence that gets triggered by the world around you. Psychologists describe a simple 3-part cycle that keeps a habit running: a cue, a routine, and a reward. For our runner, the cue was stepping out of bed and seeing the shoes waiting by the door. That sight set off the run almost without thinking, and the reward, a calmer mind, a quiet sense of achievement, kept the loop tight. Then one morning, the shoes were not by the door because a late-night cleanup had moved them to a closet. The runner had the same intention, but the cue had disappeared, and the whole automatic chain came apart. Without that familiar trigger, going for a run felt like a brand new decision, and new decisions take effort. After a few days of wrestling with the choice instead of following the cue, the behavior simply stopped. The same principle shows up everywhere. A toothbrush sitting on the counter prompts brushing without a second thought. If you hide the toothbrush inside a drawer, the habit becomes a little less automatic and easier to skip. Early behavioral experiments showed that when a signal predicting a reward was removed, the learned action fell apart quickly, even though the ability remained. The behavior was knit to the cue, not to a deep inner drive, and when the cue vanished, the routine unraveled. For the runner, the shoes by the door were that signal, and losing it turned an easy habit into a daily struggle. Willpower still existed, but willpower is like a muscle that tires, and each morning without a cue became a test instead of a rhythm. There is another layer to the collapse, deeper than the missing signal. After a single skipped day, a quiet story often begins. I've already failed, so the whole week is ruined. That all-or-nothing thinking turns a small stumble into a full stop, and the shoes stay in the closet. Psychologists call this reaction the abstinence violation effect. When a lapse feels like proof that the routine is broken, people give up entirely. The runner might think, "I'm clearly not a runner anymore," and that thought closes the door even tighter than the missing shoes. The collapse is not just about a hidden cue. It is about the meaning we attach to a single missed day. Routines that are tied tightly to identity can be especially fragile because they demand never failing. When your sense of self is built on, "I am someone who runs every single day," missing one day threatens your entire identity. That threat feels so uncomfortable that avoiding the activity altogether can seem easier than facing the gap between the ideal and the reality. By contrast, people who tie their identity to being someone who values movement find it easier to take a short walk on a bad day and keep going. Here is a turning point. The routines that last for years are not the ones that never miss a day. They are the ones that have an honest plan for the days when life gets in the way. The shoes by the door worked beautifully for 3 months, but the routine had no backup when the shoes were moved. A resilient routine includes what some call a minimum viable action, the smallest version of the behavior you can do even when everything falls apart. For the runner, that might be a 5-minute jog around the block. or simply putting on the running clothes and stepping outside for a breath of air. The point is not to maintain full performance, but to keep the connection between cue and behavior alive. When you do something, anything, the loop stays warm, and the next day it is easier to return to the full routine. But if the loop is completely broken for many days, restarting feels like pulling a heavy engine up a steep hill. Long-term observations of people who maintained exercise, writing, or meditation routines reveal a surprising pattern. The ones who succeeded were not those with flawless streaks, but those who practiced flexible persistence. They allowed themselves to adjust the time, the location, or the duration, while keeping the core action recognizable. That flexibility prevented a single disturbance, a late night, a trip, an injury from becoming a permanent stop. Yet flexibility alone is not the whole answer, because a routine can also collapse from something quieter. When the reward loses its spark, the brain gradually stops paying attention to the cue. Over time, the same run through the same streets may become stale, and the morning shoes no longer pull with the same quiet force. Some routines survive because people occasionally refresh the reward, trying a new route, listening to a podcast, or tracking progress in a different way. The runner who shifts from timing every split second to simply noticing the sunrise recharges the reward and keeps the loop strong. So the collapse was never a failure of character. It was a system failure. The system relied on a single cue in a single location, a rigid demand for perfection, and no plan for the inevitable disruption. When any one of those supports gave way, the whole structure tumbled. Think about the routines in your own life that have lasted for years, perhaps a morning coffee ritual, a bedtime story, or a weekly phone call. If you trace them back, you will very likely find that they survived because they adapted when life changed. The coffee ritual may have moved from a cafe to a home brewer, but the first quiet moment after waking remained the cue. The bedtime story may have shifted from picture books to chapter books, but the connection at the end of the day stayed intact. Now look at the routines that collapsed. The daily journal that stopped after a vacation. The gym habit that ended when the office moved. The reason some routines survive while others collapse begins to look very different now. It is about designing a routine that can survive the inevitable shifts in your environment, your energy, and your life. Surviving routines are like sturdy plants that bend in a storm, not rigid poles that snap the moment the wind changes. The routines that collapsed were rigid, built on a single cue and an all-or-nothing story. The central insight is this: a routine's strength is measured not by how long it goes without interruption, but by how quickly it can resume after one. That is a total reversal of how most of us think about habits, because we are taught to admire perfect streaks. But perfect streaks are fragile, precisely because they do not teach recovery. They only teach that any break is failure. Psychologists have noticed that people who never miss a day often have not yet faced a major life disruption, and when one arrives, the flawless streak can crumble fast. In contrast, those who have practiced recovering from small slips build a kind of psychological immune system for their routines. They learn that a missed day is not a catastrophe. It is simply a missed day, and tomorrow is a fresh start. Our runner could have learned this on the very first missed morning. If instead of worrying about the broken streak, they had said, "Okay, no full run today, but I will walk to the corner and back," the routine would have survived. But the all-or-nothing rule whispered, if it is not a full run, it does not count, and so nothing happened. Here is the most counterintuitive finding about long-lasting routines. The people who maintain them for decades are not the rigid ones. They are the creatively adaptive ones. They make what some researchers call if-then plans, not just planning to run, but planning how to adjust when it rains, when they are exhausted, or when they are away from home. If my shoes are not by the door, then I will lay my running clothes on the bed as a new cue. If I only have 10 minutes, then I will run 1 loop instead of 3. This turns a fragile routine into a robust strategy because the cue can shift without the whole loop breaking. And because the loop continues, the identity stays alive. The person remains someone who moves regularly, not someone who must run a full 5K under perfect conditions. So the collapse that seemed like a willpower failure was actually a design failure. The routine was built to work only in one exact situation, and the moment that situation changed, the support vanished. This is the pivot that changes everything. Our runner did not lack motivation. They lacked a system that could handle a clue moving from the door to the closet. Once you see routines as systems instead of tests of personal virtue, the path forward becomes clearer. You can start asking not, why can I not stick to this? But what broke in the system, and how can I make it more flexible? For the person who stopped running, the remedy is not to try harder tomorrow, but to build a resilient loop. They can put the shoes back by the door, but also decide that if the shoes are ever out of sight, a phone alarm becomes the backup cue. They can define success as did something active today, even if that something was just 5 minutes of stretching. And they can remind themselves that a missed day is a single data point, not a permanent verdict on who they are. These small shifts transform a brittle routine into a living practice that can absorb shocks. Think back to the shoes by the door on that silent morning when everything fell apart. They were not a guarantee of a lifelong habit. They were just one fragile link in a chain that needed more connections. The collapse did not happen because the person was weak. It happened because that one solitary link was all there was. Now imagine a different morning. The shoes are not there, but a gentle alarm goes off, and the person remembers the if-then plan. If I cannot run, I will walk to the end of the street. 5 minutes later, they are outside. The cool air reaches their face, and the loop stays alive. When that person returns, the shoes are placed back in their usual spot, and the next day, the full run resumes. The routine survived. It survived not because nothing went wrong, but because the system had a path through the disruption. The real secret of lasting routines is not perfection. It is recovery, and recovery is a skill that can be practiced, starting with the very next time the door stays closed and the shoes do not move.